Alright, YouTube, Trump has submitted a preliminary sort of malleable plan, which is what he tends to do, to fund his border wall, and the provisions of this would essentially cut the budget, not even by a huge amount, low double-digit total, like 10%, 15%, for the TSA, FEMA, and the Coast Guard, and the resources from that would be used to build the wall. Now, I guess the reasoning is FEMA, which is disaster and immigration surge related. The TSA, which is related to, security, supposedly. And then the Coast Guard, which also does border stuff in a marine sense. I guess the idea is that they won't need so high a budget if the wall is actually built, because it solves at least part of the problems that they would generally deal with. I tend to agree with this in spirit, but I wouldn't cut the Coast Guard. Their particular budget, the Coast Guard does need its budget. They do a lot more than just, somebody's trying to sail across into our territorial waters without permission. There are a lot of drug busts that they perform and so forth. And the Coast Guard is a second layer of protection, really, in a military sense as well, against our enemies. I'm not so sure I'd cut them. I would cut additional pork from the budget of the TSA and FEMA instead. In fact, if it were up to me, I'd get rid of FEMA altogether because it's ineffective. I would return to the civil defense system. Prior to FEMA and the absorption of the civil defense into it under, I believe, the DHS, if I remember correctly, private citizens and organized groups of citizens, militias and so forth, owning the ability to bear arms, having their weapons and their other supplies, built bunkers, they responded to disasters, they managed radio stations, some dormant, some constantly active in the case of atomic war and things of that nature. It was a very atomic era thing. I think we should bring it back, make it more like a combination of the National Guard and the Boy Scouts, and we should extend it nationwide, especially in rural and small town communities. It is intrinsic. It is of the utmost urgency for our nation that we begin preparing for the possibility of major disaster or atomic war or post-atomic war in an EMP form, frying our power grid, things like that. FEMA cannot save us if such a thing happens. The idea that FEMA will even be fundamentally capable of operating during or after an atomic war or a true large-scale disaster, another New Madrid popping off or something like that, is crazy, honestly. Large swaths of their command population would be destroyed and wouldn't even be able to issue orders. The remnant would be badly scattered. They'd be too busy battening down the hatches in their house. But there would be pockets of people still with organization if you have a civil defense that would be able to respond to outlying regions and restore order much more quickly. Additionally, because they're private citizens, I'm going to trust them more. If there's a disaster, let's say there's an atomic war tomorrow, and FEMA comes rolling down the street. My assumption is, they're probably going to drag me off to a prison camp because they're going to install a highly centralized system using essentially what amounts to slave labor to try to restore the countryside, which is neither as efficient nor as benevolent as what the civil defense would tend to do, which is try to organize people more loosely in a more libertarian fashion, honestly. It'd be able to respond more quickly. The people that would be showing up would be from within or nearby your own community, certainly in most cases within your own state. They would share the same culture. FEMA's a federal organization. You can't guarantee that'd be the case. The civil defense also allows private individuals to invest in some of that stuff that would be needed for disaster relief, needed for wartime and so forth. It could give people training. Give people training in maintaining and firing weapons, operating ham radios, restoring electrical grids, things like that, skilled trades. Give people that training and let them do it themselves. That's what the spirit of this country is all about. I would eliminate FEMA altogether. We don't need them. At the very least, significantly weaken them and specifically relegate them solely to disaster relief, nothing related to anything else. They'll come in, there's a disaster, they'll set up some tents, they'll supply people with MREs and so forth temporarily, while the civil defense and individuals, private landowners and so forth, they're the ones that are restoring things in accordance with their local community's ability to do so. FEMA should step in only as an afterthought. We look at Katrina. What did FEMA do there? What did FEMA do in Katrina? When 10,000 people fled New Orleans and were essentially refugees within the same state and country that they were already residents of, because their residents were still flooded out. Did FEMA help them? Not really. It took them a while to respond. No, what FEMA actually did was go around and essentially just confiscate people's firearms and occasionally prevent looting. So it's all they did. It became a second police force. Well, the police were already there. They couldn't respond either. It was too big a disaster. So we've seen how problematic FEMA really is. As for the TSA, what is the TSA? It's a quasi-governmental order that violates your privacy on a regular basis. Why do we even fund it? It's not necessary. It's certainly not for travel within the United States. If you're talking about doing more intensive screening for people that are on international flights, yeah, go crazy. Go whole hog if you want to do that. Especially if it ensures that we're still capable of traveling to and from other countries because they've raised their standards of security. But within the United States, like I get on a plane in Burlington and I want to go to, I want to take a quick vacation in Texas or something. Why the hell should I have to go through their extensive security screenings? Why the hell should I have to do that? It's not really necessary. The number of people, even before these intensive screenings, the number of people who actually tried to hijack aircraft was still phantasmagorically low. Why are we even funding it? We don't need as many TSA agents. We don't need it to be as intrusive. We don't need all the high-tech crap. Open somebody's suitcase up and go through it and determine whether there's a bomb in it. Half the time they can't even determine that. We've had times where journalists have snuck obviously bomb-looking materials, knives, guns, and everything else through the security line. It never gets confiscated. Nobody ever sees it. More than half the time it gets through. I had a teacher once in middle school, actually, told us the tale. Said, oh yeah, I had a hunting knife on me. And I just slid it through. I just put it in with my clothes, slid it through. Nobody ever confiscated it. I carried it right on the airplane. I reattached it to my belt, behind my coat. And got away with it. Nobody confiscated it. Nobody asked any questions. Nobody cared. So that's what the TSA is up to. The Coast Guard, though, is a good organization, and I don't think their budget should be cut. I would oppose doing that. Especially if it's going to affect the pay of the people that do that job. It'd be a difficult job. When you're expected occasionally, you're going to have to go out in a storm to rescue someone. Yeah, you should probably be paid a little bit for that. Yeah, you're probably earning your keep. Or, oh yeah, here's this ship, it's kind of listing, and it's just floating around offshore. It's kind of suspicious. And it might actually be like a mobile meth distribution center loaded down with heavily armed cartel members. Yeah, I think we should probably support our boys in light blue, so to speak. As for the TSA and FEMA, though, yeah, go ahead and cut them. I'd cut them more. I'd get rid of FEMA, and I'd severely reform the TSA. They'd have to make do with half the budget that they've got now if they wanted to keep operating. Because I'd divert all of that money and all those resources to our external borders. That's what we should be doing. As far as people on domestic flights, there's not really that big a risk that somebody is going to actually be crazy enough to try to hijack the plane and fly it into something. It happens rarely. When it does, it's people that came in from foreign shores like we had on 9/11. People that they weren't born in the United States. No, they were Saudi Arabians or they were from Lebanon and Tunisia and so forth. Well, they got into this country because we didn't have a good enough system to check them out and make sure this wasn't going to happen. It's just like surveillance. We conduct all this domestic surveillance in violation completely of the Fourth Amendment. It doesn't really do anything because we're not diverting our resources properly enough to looking towards external threats. I like to believe that the average American can be trusted to be lawful within the United States. And again, as always, why not just end the drug war and divert these police resources instead of busting a bunch of potheads? Why don't we do something that actually matters? Why don't we go after the criminally insane and the serial killers and serial rapists and terrorists? Why aren't we focusing on that? Why do we have to focus on people who are smoking a bong? It's disgraceful that the government thinks that we need to divert billions and billions of dollars to that. And at the same time, they say, oh, the border wall is racist. It has nothing to do with race. That's a lie, and these people know it. Some of these people that are coming in illegally are as white as I am. And nobody wants to talk about that fact. Nobody wants to admit. The ethno-nationalists don't usually want to talk about it either because they have to admit that there are people that are coming in illegally and they're all, these third worlders and they're not white, they're not Caucasian, and then some of them are. It kind of throws a wrench in their arguments, generally speaking. They have to revert to civic nationalism to actually formulate why they would be upset about it half the time. There's my thoughts on his proposal. Yeah, build the wall. It doesn't need to be built. You don't have to cut the Coast Guard's budget to do that. Cut more out of the TSA and FEMA. Better yet, get rid of them. Privatize the TSA completely, constrain it further, relegate it primarily to defending us from foreign threats. That's step number 1. Step 2, FEMA. Get rid of it. Get the civil defense back. Put up some propaganda. I want to see more atomic era propaganda, damn it. I want to see more mushroom clouds wherever I look. I want to see like the Nifty 50s style propaganda because it was cool. It was awesome. I want to see stuff like that. Oh, do your part. Buy a ham radio. Something like that. Do your part. Join the civil defense. Learn how to shoot things that are potentially shooting at you because they've been sent over from communist China. That's what I want to see. We've done it before. We didn't end up actually having an atomic war, but at least we were ready if one happened. We're not ready right now. People have grown so complacent, they're utterly reliant on the government to defend them. Governments don't defend people. Governments defend property. And at best, they're leasing you the property anyway. You're renting it from the government most of the time. So what's the point? What's to defend? You don't even own the property. No, I look forward to a future that's better than the one that we have now. I want actual property ownership. People doing things to themselves insofar as they can. It'll be more efficient. It'll be less abusive. It'll be more inclusive. It'll be a better country that we live in if we accomplish this. Trump's not going to bring all of that about to be, but through things like this, just by even decreasing the budget of some of these bureaucracies to pay for something that actually matters, it's a good idea and it helps get the ball rolling. So I generally support this, with the exception of cutting the Coast Guard's budget. I wouldn't cut their budget. If anything, they probably deserve more money. They're underfunded compared to some of these other military groups that we have. Why don't you take some money from the Pentagon and give it to the Coast Guard? They're doing more work anyway. That'd be my feelings on it. That's about all.